But I did learn that women were not allowed to be ordained. And that was the first time I was like, what do you mean? Like you can't ever have a career. That career is, even if
Right.
God calls you to be a minister, that door is shut for you because of the church, not because God doesn't call you. If God calls you to do something, you do it, right?
This is Frank Schaeffer on Facebook and YouTube and podcast and many other ways to see this. And I am on today with Zeilstra, a beautiful Dutch name that I'll learn to pronounce in another 3 or 4 years. So you have something very interesting going. Tell us about it.
Gender fair. So
Yeah.
Gender fair in its simplest form is fair trade, but for women and diversity. And we started this about 5-6 years ago when a lot of companies in America would sign up to pledge or make a commitment. And one of those commitments was to the UN Women's Empowerment Principles. And they had come out with these guidelines for gender equality. And about creating a safe work environment and making sure that there's equal representation at all levels, whether it's in business or politics or nonprofits, and really, equal pay and all that kind of stuff. But these were just guidelines, and there's no way to actually measure a company's progress once they've made that commitment, or even keep them accountable. So we created these metrics. There's 16 metrics. And we created them and then independently started researching these companies to see if they're actually meeting a standard. And less than 10% are actually meeting the standard for gender fairness. But we do this independently. Companies, have to do, as publicly traded companies have to report this data to the SEC, but they also have it in their annual reports and CSR reports and websites and things like that. And so we really wanted to create a way for consumers, especially, to know, right, which companies are fair to its employees. And, just like fair trade or organic or, some of these other seals, this is a gender fair seal. And so consumers, mostly, women who, really are the primary, purchasers of brands, or even hotels or airlines or shampoo, cars, whatever it is, women make the primary, those decisions. So if they care about this, and we know they care about this, as a matter of fact, men even care about this more than women, based on our latest research, that, they're going to make those changes, when it comes to, products that are fair or not fair towards women and diversity.
Have you seen a reaction from some corporations in a positive way who are already a little more enlightened in terms of fairness, especially towards women?
Absolutely. I think a lot of these companies who have done the work, to be more fair, to increase representation of women and diversity on its boards and leadership, and to have policies that support working moms and dads and other things that we measure. I think they're delighted that there's an independent third party that substantiates that and also promotes them. I mean, it's a real win-win for everyone.
When you started this, did you alert some of these companies that they were going to be rated, or did they just sort of find out about you as time goes on?
We did actually alert a number of companies because, before we publish it, we reach out to them and their PR departments to validate what we have. Things change all the time. New executives get added. They don't always update their websites. So we do, reach out and get them to validate it. Also with some of the employee policies, whether it's, some of the work-life balance policies, like flexible work arrangements, sometimes they don't, or even paid family leave, right? For maternity, paternity leave. They don't publish that. And we only credit companies if they publish this data, right, on their websites, the career sites, because no female employee wants, or potential employee wants to go to a recruiter and say, so how many weeks of maternity leave do I get before I accept this position? So, we really try and get companies to publicize this so that we incorporate it. Even if they have good policies, but they don't, put it in their, their website.
Yeah.
We don't give them credit.
When you put your board together, I've been looking at your pages and looking at who's on the board and so forth. Are they drawn mostly from corporate America? You seem to have some really interesting people. I just wondered if you can go through the kind of people that are contributing to the board. And you're the CEO, I believe. There was someone else who was the founder, or do I have that wrong?
In Canada, Amy Cross. She was the founder.
Amy Cross was the founder. And are the board all from the US, or are they an international board?
We have an international board. We have board members in Canada and in Europe as well.
Yeah.
Standing to both those regions. So it's important to have, board members there. And I think we can't have any board members from the corporate side,
Sure.
that we can't, I have a lot of amazing, CEOs and C-suite level people who love what we're doing, but we can't, we have to keep a distance.
Sure.
So we only have board members who are, who don't have, or currently not within the corporation.
Now, you before you did this, you were working on Wall Street. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then how long did that go for, and what were you up to?
Well, I started my career actually in strategy consulting, and it was a great 8 years of kind of globetrotting, as a consultant. I worked in Canada for a year in the oil and gas industry, and then transferred to New York. And, I arrived, and as soon as I got my little apartment, I was sent off to Asia for a couple of years, worked in Indonesia for the Minister of Finance, and then China for a year and a half, and, working on the People's Bank, the Central Bank of China. Great experiences. And also in Europe for a European company, a Dutch company, actually. And then across the US. So I had a great, education, practical education, and, working for this consultancy, and then was recruited out to work with JP Morgan, and had 6 years, of, again, strategy, and did a lot of leadership development work, a lot of merger integration work. So it was diverse, and it was a great 14 years of, corporate America. And
then you've been doing FAIR for 5 years, I think?
5 years, yeah.
Okay, so then somewhere in the mix there, you were telling me the other day, you might be coming up to my part of the world, New England, because your 15-year-old is playing lacrosse, a game or something like that. So then you have a couple other kids as well, don't you?
I have 3 boys.
Yeah.
Just 10, 14, and 15.
Because, my daughter, Jessica, who is the CEO of a little investment company that looks for and invests in and does work with green energy companies, was telling me the other day, in reference to something that I've been writing that you know about, which we're not going to talk about because this is about you, not my books, but that she made CEO, she's 50 now, and she made CEO 3 or 4 years ago of this company, and people would ask her about her process. And she said that what's interesting is anytime she would bring up the fact that being a parent had actually been a really good preparation for being a CEO, she said, I'd either be met with silence or they would change the subject, as in somehow these two worlds can't coexist. Don't tell us that part of your journey towards becoming a CEO was also being a parent, as if somehow the professional world almost finds family embarrassing. And I'm wondering, in your own experience of fitting together your work as on an executive level as someone in business, and now at FAIR, and also with parenthood, do you kind of resonate with what she was telling me, as in, and how it all started is she was saying post COVID, with Zoom meetings, all of a sudden she's online with bank people, and then there's a toddler runs by, and it used to be you just kind of hide your family and pretend they're not there. Now everything's changing, and then half these people don't want to go back to work because they'd actually like to still be with their family. And I know you and I have been talking about that in reference to things we're both working on, but do you want to riff on that a little bit, the changing climate post-COVID, being a parent and at the same time in business, how it's changing with people wanting to stay home, just sort of that mix of stuff that I just brought up?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was in corporate America, even at, probably about 15 years ago, I remember hearing about my boss who had her third child. And I was pregnant at the time, and she was saying that, she hid her pregnancy. And I don't know how you hide that, but she hid it. And, she went to work every day and went on a 2-week vacation. And that's how scared she was of being, passed over for promotion. And I remember thinking, wow, I can't believe that, that in this day and age, it was only 15 years ago, that actually, that's really an issue. And I know that, I had my first child, and they were quite generous with my maternity leave, but when my executive assistant, was pregnant, she, I think I had 4 months and she had 2 weeks. I thought that was really unfair. Why give, someone like myself who has, a good salary, has all the help, that I can need, this person has nothing, they can't afford to have a nanny and all the rest of that. So I thought there was, but I know that's been changing over the years since 15 years ago. But and COVID, has kind of equalized a lot of this, only because we don't hide behind our parenthood anymore. And we used to have, people were afraid to even put a picture at their office, on their desk in the office of their family, thinking that, people would say, oh, you're on the mommy track, and you're not as committed to the company, or you're not going to want to travel. Like they always thought, once I had a baby, they said, well, we don't want to give you that big project because you're going to have to travel. Well, who decides that, right? They thought they were being considerate. And now I think, post COVID, and companies were very afraid even to give employees Friday's work from home day or something like that, because they thought, well, no one's going to work, everybody's going to be, enjoying the time with their families. It's like an extended weekend. So they were afraid to do that. And when COVID hit, they thought, many companies thought, well, that's it. No one's, who's going to work? What are we going to do? And they found out that people were much more productive at home. First of all, you don't have the long commutes like I had. And yes, all of a sudden the CEO that, you barely got into his office, without a 6-month waiting list. And all of a sudden it was much more accessible and much more of a human than you thought before, right? Because CEO is saying, oh, you know what, just hold on for a second. My baby is crying next door and I need to tend to, and it made people, the executives much more real and human. And also, seeing that side of them really, I think made it a lot more friendlier, workplace, and in both ways, and I think executives, felt that, they could be themselves just as much as anyone else. So I think it's really helped, and companies are still productive and people are still productive. And I think post-COVID, companies are much more flexible now in terms of, okay, do you want to go back to the office 5 days a week? Do you want, if not, is it 3 days? Is it 2 days? So employees are saying, I want to be back. Some, like, especially young people without families, they want to be back in the office, 5 days a week. They miss that socialization. But for parents, I think they say, I do want to be back because it's important to connect with people face to face, but give me 2 days at home so I can balance my life a little bit more.
Yeah, because it seems to me the whole climate is changing. But one thing that's becoming very evident is that on the right and in the evangelical circles I'm from, that always talks about being pro-family and so forth, the public persona of the right that talks about these things, when it gets to actual legislation of spending tax dollars, for instance, to do anything that actually helps families. If you were from another planet and we're just looking at how little in the United States is done for families, combined with corporations essentially trying to treat women as if they were men in the 1950s when no one had a family and you just pretended work was work and family was family. You put all that together, and I don't think, it is changing a bit, but it seems to me anyway, you couldn't design a culture which actually, if you measured it by what's really done rather than what's said, it's really not only anti-child, but also anti-family. It's not just anti-woman, it's also anti-male parent as well, because nothing is designed to make family relationships a priority, and everything is designed to make business a priority, as if these two things can exist separately. And then, the mentality goes further than that, because, for instance, in Japan, where they had more generous family leave for males as well, men were made to feel that, if you take the family leave, you're not serious either. So sort of suffer from the same thing of a woman at the office not wanting to put up family pictures or say she's pregnant. So that it isn't just a woman's issue. It seems to me that the corporate structure that we've inherited was designed by men who acted as if business did not have to accommodate family at all. And now that's somewhat changing. But do you see some of that?
It is changing. I think that there's still the big issue of, and you mentioned it, paid family leave. There's no paid family leave in this country. And we're the only industrialized nation with no paid family leave. It's really surprising to me, because America is so advanced in so many ways that they are not supporting working moms. And, quite frankly, dads want paid family leave too.
Well, of course they do.
But they've never wanted to admit it. There's still a culture that, you say in Japan, but it's here too, where even if a company offers paid paternity leave, how many men actually take that?
Right.
So it's one thing to give that benefit, but it's another thing to, because if the culture doesn't really support that, right? And I think companies need to almost force their employees to take it, rather than, because otherwise the culture is going to squash, anyone from doing so.
I think maybe with parents swapping off more in the COVID years of who goes to work, who stays home with preschool children, or even preschool children, say ages birth through 3 or 4, there's a lot of dads who would be happy to swap off with their partners if it's in a pair-bonded partnership, or if it's single moms looking for help from other people. But our culture sort of acts like, well, this can all happen by itself. And yet we demand a full work week from everybody. And wages are so low on the minimum wage level that the working poor have to do 3 jobs or not get paid, or we don't pay them much the way McDonald's or Walmart or Amazon do, so that they supplement their income with food stamps or whatever, or Medicaid. When you look at the whole system, it just seems the overriding thing is to ignore, first of all, ignore women's needs, but then just generally ignores family needs, because child minding is seen as a kind of a female activity. And so it skews toward, well, we just don't have to deal with that, because the mentality is still men are the more serious employee.
Yeah, and I think during COVID, you saw millions of women leave the workplace, mothers, and most of those are women of color, right?
Yeah.
Because they just could not manage, the childcare and the schooling, the home, and everything else. So they left, and companies need to really, start recruiting them back, because, all the progress that women have made is all of a sudden, we're going backwards by, could be a decade before we get to where we were before. But paid family leave is so important. I know in Europe, look at Europe, my cousins there, they, the father works 4 days a week, the mom, works 4 days a week, and has childcare. So and then the grandparents, give some childcare. They have subsidized, childcare. And so it works, it keeps women in the workforce, but not in a way that, that they're overworked and overstressed and can't manage it all. So I think there's look at China, you mentioned Japan, but China, both parents work, but the grandparents are the ones raising the children. I know you're doing, a lot of that.
Well, because you know me, that for the last 12 years with my 3 youngest grandchildren, that Jeannie, my wife, and I have been doing full-time childcare, and both my son and my daughter-in-law work full-time. Now, of course, my son is home, so he's helping with school pickups and he's around and this kind of thing. But we have a situation which some people would regard as from almost another era. One of the reasons is because we've stayed put. We've been in the same house 41 years. My son lives across the street. He was in the Marine Corps, then went to the University of Chicago and graduated, moved in with us, had his first child. So we have a relationship much more like the old Italian farmhouse where you just build another wing and everybody stays there and the grandparents are doing the childcare. But of course, one reason that's gone away in the US, other than governmental neglect and fake family values from the religious right and the rest, is that we've segregated the generations. So older people go to these nobody under 55 communities, of retirement, and then the kids are in daycare, as if somehow the generations don't need each other. Of course, this is bad for everybody, but but in our family we've managed to do something different. I want to bring up something not related strictly to FAIR, but just because I know you a little bit. I know that you understand my path out of the right wing of the evangelical community because you understand a little bit about that community and have had some experiences with that, which must inform this whole family values issue, because I look at the religious right as preaching a kind of a misogynistic fake family values, where we talk about abortion and we talk about sexual issues and women and gay people. But when it actually comes down to it, push Republican agendas through Congress, which in essence say you're on your own and everything else is socialism. And that's kind of where we're at. What's your own journey with all of that? Where do you fit in with this?
Well, as you know, I grew up in the Netherlands, which, everyone would probably call a socialist country.
Yeah.
It's really, Netherlands is all about entrepreneurs. They're very, very entrepreneurial. And, but I grew up and I wasn't really church there other than maybe going at Christmas and Easter. I remember being an angel in a Christmas, the Christmas story. And that was it. But I did have a strong faith. And I think my grandmother is the one that gave me that faith, right? It's passed down from my grandmother. Yeah. My parents, not so much, but my grandmother, and her father was a pastor in the Dutch Reformed Church, and quite a well-known pastor during his time. And this was, over 100 years ago. He was very instrumental in getting the women the right to vote in the Netherlands. And he would stand, and also, trying to get, women as pastors. He did a whole speech, and I've got it written down. It's in Dutch, but, maybe I'll get it translated for you at some point. But he gave this speech that said it is wrong, to not allow women to be ordained. It's mm-hmm. wrong. And he was, he was a theologian. He was a pastor of a large church. This is 100 years ago. He really advocated for women. And my grandmother was a nurse, and she had to give that up because it was very, she married a very traditional guy who was not religious, but he was very traditional. And then when we moved to Canada, I was probably about 12. We were invited to a Christian Missionary Alliance church. And that was the first of me going to an evangelical church. And, it was a warm and loving and wonderful church, made many friends there. And I think it's different from the American evangelical church. So, some of the things you talk about, I didn't necessarily experience in Canada, because I think, my brother-in-law is a pastor, a retired pastor of the Christian Missionary Alliance Church. However, I realized when I was a young teen, and my dad was, my mom was, became born again, and my dad was not really into the church. He went because he was, he went with my mom. He was very much a feminist, very much pro-education and career for, his two daughters. And I have he had one son. But I did learn that women were not allowed to be ordained. And that was the first time I was like, what do you mean? Like you can't ever have a career. That career is, even if right. God calls you to be a minister, that door is shut for you because of the church, not because God doesn't call you. If God calls you to do something, you do it, right? But if your church, just did not believe in that. To this day, women can't be ordained in that church. And I was kind of like, well, that's not really a church for me, but other than, that particular, issue, I didn't see a lot of, other issues that you've talked about in the American evangelical church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now you're here. And
I'm
so
here.
part of what you confront with FAIR is still an agenda that comes from, you might call Trump's evangelicals, 70% of whom now say he did not lose the election, and they buy that Joe Biden and nefarious liberals and who knows what somehow stole it. That same group has within it a kind of a misogynistic core of male hierarchy, which still believes at its core that not only should women be denied abortions, but that companies run by evangelicals that don't want to provide contraceptive coverage should be allowed to do that as religious liberty. That during the COVID epidemic, they went to the Supreme Court and won with the conservative majority there, saying that churches that wanted to meet and become epicenters and super spreaders of COVID had the right to do so under religious liberty. And it seems to me that what FAIR is doing is on an oblique, perhaps indirect, but nevertheless real collision course with what drives a lot of conservative evangelical groups in terms of their view of women. And their view of women are that, they should not be in the workplace, or if they are, they should be subservient to their husbands and do so only with their husband's permission, or whatever it may be. But the kind of hierarchical misogyny that is built into the evangelical community and is very dominant within the Republican Party now because of that block of voters that basically made Trump president and are now the core of evangelicalism. I don't think the corporations that you're grading can be oblivious to the fact that that element of conservative America is on a collision course with any corporate activity that would give women true equality, because they don't believe in true female equality. I don't mean the corporations, I mean the subset of conservative evangelicals. Mm-hmm. And so, like, how do you look at that in terms of being CEO of a company? And within our midst in this country, we have a whole religious movement that essentially is dedicated to making sure that what you're trying to do does not happen.
Well, that's a lot. There's a lot in that question. I again, from my evangelical background in Canada, and I still have, a real community there, including my brother-in-law, who I respect, who's my spiritual advisor. I respect and admire, and he does not believe in, he believes that, women are equal to men, and he did a whole study on that, and that was one of the issues he's always had as well. So, but the Canadian, my community in Canada, who I love dearly, were appalled, absolutely appalled, that the evangelical community was supporting Trump. They just did not. They could not bridge that. That was just something that. And I talked to many of them, and they, not one did, understood that the reasoning behind that. They were just, so there, and I think so there's definitely something about America and evangelical America than, the rest of the world. I imagine evangelicals in the Middle East or Africa or Asia would probably agree more aligned with the Canadian thought,
And the same in the UK, where I have a lot of family, and they look at horror at the US. To them, the evangelical community here that supports Trump, my nieces and nephews in the UK who are evangelicals, one runs a very well-known evangelical school in Cambridge, for instance, they would not regard American evangelicals in the Trump camp. I think they wouldn't even extend to them the label Christian any longer, because to them, it's so far away from their idea of Christianity. So it certainly isn't universal, but it's true here in the States.
Yes, and it's hard to understand that. And I think there has to be other factors about America and American that does not exist, in other countries. So it's, there's an intersectionality that you need to explore, I think, that about America, because you look at, why people voted. I mean, they've done a lot of research on why people voted for Trump. And, some of it, I can understand the rationale behind it. Many of whom may not be educated, live in rural areas. Their communities are desolated, by technology, not immigrants, necessarily, but by technology and globalization. I get it. I understand, make America great again, because for them, America was great at one point, and for them, America is not great anymore, right? Because it used to be, that you could, feed your family, and not have both parents work or have multiple jobs. You had your job, you could provide for them, you could, and for many, that wasn't the case anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then, you underpin religion, and, and I think Trump was someone like I knew Trump from before, he became president,
I mean, you knew him personally, hanging out in New York.
I've met him a few times. And, he was not well liked, in New York City. We knew him as a con artist, right?
Yeah.
Knew that all this, the Trump signs on those big buildings, that, those were not his buildings, that was just his name. We knew him. No one really cared for him in my circles. And we knew him, as a cheater in a comment. So we that's publicized. But think about people that across the country who only saw him on The Apprentice, and this guy was bigger than life, beautiful wife, and all the money that he supposedly earned, and success, and someone who's a real man's man, right? He's a man's man. If very masculine, very brute in many ways, and I think that attracted people to that kind of persona, and saying, well, look what he's a self-made billionaire, and he did it all by himself, and I think they were sold that story, like a traveling salesman, who has the potions to make you rich, or to make you successful, or to bring back those jobs, and so he promised a lot of these things. So when we knew that, we knew him in a different light, and I mean, we see the repercussions of that, through 4 years and now and all the rest of that. So, and
COVID and the rest. People ask me, because of my evangelical background, the typical question on the media when I go on MSNBC or something is, how can they stick with him knowing all this? And I tried to explain that when it comes to the evangelical segment of that voter bloc that went along with it, that what people don't understand is these folks within the homeschool movement, Christian colleges, Christian radio, Christian television, Christian publishing. When I say Christian, I mean evangelical, not in the big sense of Christian, are raised in a separate subculture that feels victimized by the secular trends in society. So they're already regarding themselves as outsiders looking for special information from sources that are outside of the media, outside of science, outside of technology, and outside of the universities. So when someone comes along and says, I'm telling you the truth, everything else is fake news, they're already thinking that way because their mom says, believe the book of Genesis, not what evolutionary biology tells you. And someone else says, the Bible has this end time scenario and it has nothing to do with pollution and rising oceans. It's Jesus coming back to it, putting his foot back on the Mount of Olives. You've got this whole alternatives thing. So that fit very well with the way he was doing things. And then you add to that the fact that a lot of these evangelicals saw him as a sort of a God-sent biblical figure. And when you look at the Bible, you have King David murdering someone, committing adultery, and God still used him. And they looked at Trump this way. In other words, it wasn't, is he a good guy? The question was, is he God's chosen to do some great work, probably beyond even his own understanding? That's Trump's understanding in American history. And then once it becomes a matter of theological faith, then it's like going to a conservative Roman Catholic and saying, well, there's no such thing as virgins' births. How can you believe this? Hey, it's a matter of faith. This isn't science or facticity anymore. When you put those two things together, these aren't folks who, if you show them other numbers or the truth about who he was in New York as a con artist and this kind of thing, it's not going to make any difference to them. They've decided God's using him in spite of, fill in the blank, grabbing women, kissing people who don't want to be kissed, whatever it may be. So once it gets into that realm, and a lot of the secular commentators I know just didn't seem to get that. And that is, they don't know anybody who believes in the religious realm and the supernatural personally to the point where it just doesn't matter. And they didn't get it, and they still sort of don't. So I think it's sort of those two elements, what you were saying about voters and what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think it's, and I don't want to brush evangelicals in America all in the same, with the same brush, but I think,
sure.
I think certainly, I'm gonna have a very strong faith, as you know. I follow Jesus and all his. I try to follow his teaching, and certainly my community of evangelicals would not be in the camp of voting for Trump. Why? Because they're critical thinkers. They're mostly very educated, and can see BS when they see BS. So I think it's, I think social media had a big part in this, why people voted for him. And I don't know if you saw the movie Social Dilemma, but, it's interesting.
Sure.
If you start to go down a path, and that you believe, but it just gets reinforced and reinforced and reinforced, and it's very dangerous because for the average person who just doesn't really do their homework or research or thinks critically, just, it's almost like borrowed knowledge. If somebody says it on their news feed, or their social feed, then they start to believe that. But not just believe it once, it gets, once they click on it and they like it, it just gets reinforced. And you see that in so many different ways, even with anti-vaxxers or with conspiracy theories, that you have to really kind of remove yourself from some of that and say, okay, what let's think about this in a critical way, and really do the research, whether it's vaccines or whether about Trump, winning the election, and because it's very deceptive once you start down this rabbit hole. And you just, and I have friends who are anti-vaxxers, and I've seen them go into this kind of dark place, and you just can't get them out of it, and shake them and say, think, this is not true. Like you have to find ways to help them, to create some doubt in their minds. That's all you have to do, is to create some doubt, and then they kind of start moving out of it. But it's almost like it was very cultish, I think, for a lot of people, that he became a bit of a cult leader. And he replaced God and Jesus, is what because they started to think he was the chosen one. And then once you start down that path, I think everything is just reinforces it, your thought. And we've seen many people fail, or and then if you have Christian leaders that you trust, you may not trust, Jesus may not be as accessible to you to give, but you trust some of these religious leaders who kind of reinforce that, who said, I don't watch any news anymore, I trust these three people. And then it's very hard to kind of pull them away from that. I'm going to just mention, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are on my podcast, Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and I'm talking with Zeilstra, who is the CEO of FAIR, which is an organization that checks up and rates corporate behavior towards women in America. I have a question from somebody who just put this up, and that is, how would you score the Biden administration on efforts towards not only equality, but equity so far, I guess? Wow, thank you for that question. I think it's a little bit early, he's, he hasn't been around long enough to see, to be able to be scored, but I think he's taking a lot of steps, to really advance, diversity and equality. I know he's got a center for equality. I know, one of the women that runs that. And certainly paid leave is something that he's very serious about. And hopefully that will, pass soon. But it's a little bit too early to rate the Biden administration. But I know this is one of the key things that, that they want to get done.
Do you, I know you sent me a film that had been made interviewing various CEOs that were taking a more progressive position in terms of women and workplace diversity, but also, I'm guessing, post-COVID, people working at home who want to, and parental leave and so forth. There were people like the CEO of Pfizer in that and some others. Now, this was a film that was made by some friends of yours, wasn't it?
Not friends per se, but yes, I know them quite well. And it's called,
and what's it called?
Why is Mona Lisa Smiling? And it's going to be in probably in theaters and business schools and businesses themselves, and like in the fall. And it's really about purpose-driven CEOs who are not just looking at shareholder value. They are looking at, what are we doing to the environment? How are we treating, our people? And, how are we, making the world a little better than we left it, than we started. So I think it's and some of these companies are really taking themselves, to a higher level of leadership. These CEOs, are committed to really looking at shareholder value. I mean,
are these companies that you also have rated? I mean, when you watch the movie and some of these guys are presented as people with more of a vision of equality and diversity, but also environmental concerns and family and balance. Is this something that is reflected in any of the ratings that are coming in on those companies, or don't you have that information yet?
I do have rating, like gender fair rating. Is that what you're talking about? I do have ratings for these companies, and for the most part, they're gender fair. Not all of them. I think the film was definitely, more tilted towards the environment and sustainability. I think they've made commitments towards a more diverse workforce, but they may not have reached that standard yet.
Yeah, the question is, as the CEO of Gender Fair, you're committed to equality. Tell us how Gender Fair's app can put this power into ordinary people's hands, or just people's hands.
Yeah, so we have rated all publicly traded companies, but we really just took the consumer-facing ones, which is about 800, and we scored them in a 100-point scale. And any company that has 70 or higher is gender fair on the metrics that I mentioned before. And we look at, leadership representation, employee policies, including sexual harassment policies and pay parity. We look at advertising. We look at whether a company breaks stereotypes in advertising and imagery. And we look at philanthropy. Do they give back to causes of women and girls? And do they have women-owned suppliers and things like that? So we rate companies. They represent about 2,500 brands, because consumers don't shop, companies. They don't shop Unilever or P&G. They shop Dove soap or, Neutrogena. So we had to map all the brands to the companies. And our app allows you to either search for a brand or company or scan a logo. So I could scan, say, Delta Airlines, their logo, and it'll give you the score. And if the score is below 70, which is the standard, then it'll recommend a product or company that with a higher score that is gender fair.
Now, how do people access this app?
It's very simple. It's for free. It's on the App Store, Gender Fair.
And that's all they need to do is go to the App Store and find Gender Fair.
Yeah.
And then your phone can access it. And then from then on, you can scan a logo, whatever it may be.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many companies do you add? I mean, obviously the research keeps growing, so you're putting more and more people into this process?
So 800 companies representing 2,500 brands right now, and we're coming out with a tool for private companies to do their own self-assessment to see if they're gender fair, and if they're gender fair, we'll put them on the app. So we're working with a couple of private companies now to get them rated.
And do you have access to numbers that would let you know how the app is being used in terms of whether people are actually aware of it and downloading this and using it?
Well, we just launched it in December, and we're trying to do as much as possible to get the word out. It costs a lot of money, but so it's going to take a little bit of time. But I'm doing a lot of these kinds of interviews to get to consumers who care about this. We just commissioned a study of 2,400 adults across the country, and that was done in the early part of this year to see what do people really care about when it comes to gender and diversity in general. And it was interesting that and will they switch brands in case of a company being more fair. And the research was quite interesting in that men cared about this even more than women. We knew women cared about it, but we didn't expect men to care about it more. And then the actual metrics that we used were surprising to me as well, because I thought that people really cared about if the company had a female CEO or female board members or women of color in the C-suite and those things. And they were actually on the bottom of the ratings in terms of what was most important to people. What was the top issue for consumers, men and women, was sexual harassment. Second most important one was pay, pay parity, fairness in pay. Third was flexible work, arrangements, work-life balance. And the fourth was career advancement. So, initially I was like, wow, I didn't expect that, because, in the press and companies always tout, oh, we have, we brought in another female board member or, a woman of color in the C-suite. But what really matters to people is just give me a safe place to work, pay me fairly, and give me some flexibility so I can balance my career with my family responsibilities.
Yeah, maybe not have to pretend I don't have a family.
Right.
Another question comes in from someone watching saying, and if a company doesn't meet the standards, do you have a best practices to help those companies to get their numbers up?
Yes, absolutely. So we have taken all the data and put it on in our self-assessment database where companies can go in and self-assess themselves and get the benchmarks, and then they get a report on observations, recommendations, and resources to do better. So they have, it's not just a score, but it's also, these are the best practices, and this is what you need to do to improve the score, whether it's on employee policies or whether it's on, their advertising or philanthropy. So they have a roadmap, to get to gender fair.
Do you ever get any gender fair type questions from the media who are aware of what you're doing, who call you up and say, Zay, please tell us what's the worst big company in America, or specific, like, we're doing an article on McDonald's and we want to know how they rate or whatever? Or are you being used as a source by academics and media for hard facts on what companies actually do and how they rate in those areas that you measure?
We do get a lot of requests for our data and for reports. So
and you share it?
And we share it, yeah.
So someone watching this could go to you and say, ask a question that they might ask. I mean, what they might come to you asking would be, for instance, what?
Well, they could be asking, so we did a report on the care economy. So especially now with COVID, which companies have good policies, on work-life balance, for example? And do they provide mental health or other kind of health care for their employees, which is one of the things we measure. So we put a report together, and this is we're a public benefit corporation. So our data, for the public, is available for the public. But we need to, support it ourselves as well. So it depends on who we have sold our data to some providers that need it. But we, for the most part, it's on the app as well.
Coming out of COVID, are you going to update some data? And I'll give you an example. As you know, I'm writing about and working on a project that involves the idea of work-life balance, women's role, and so forth and so on. One question that I would have is this a company that's making an effort to increase, for instance, the ability of people to leave a job, go home and care for children for a couple of years, come back to the job without losing any forward momentum in their career? You have to let the dog out. You might have a dog here too. So would you be modifying the kind of parameter that you judge people on based on more information coming in and expectations? For instance, better family leave. If a woman leaves her job for 2 years and cares for a child at home while her husband works, or her partner, or if a man stays home with the child and whatever, is it a more friendly atmosphere for families in terms of being able to come back to career with no loss of position? Those sorts of questions seem to me post-COVID to be much more in the fore than they would have been even a year ago, let alone 2 or 3 years ago. Are your questions evolving? Are you adding to those in the light of this kind of forward momentum and more enlightenment as family policy?
Yes, we do evolve our questions. We do measure returnship, which is what you were referring to. So women. Is that
what it's called, returnship?
Returnship. If you take a break from work 2 or 3 years, a lot of companies have returnship programs.
And some have better ones than others.
Yeah, some don't have any, and some have better. Yeah, that really invest in getting women, post leave to come back. Yeah,
wouldn't you think the best policies for women would be ones that would apply to men, women, non-binary people equally? So it's not geared towards women. It's just fair to all genders, however you identify yourself.
That's right. Yeah. We measure, paternity leave, because we do look at, fairness when it comes to men as well.
Yeah.
So, we look at paternity leave and the policies, and many companies don't have that, or others have, they give women, maybe 6 weeks and men 2, so that data is all available. And also in our advertising, we look at, companies who break stereotypes with all genders, not just women. If you see a man coming home and, changing a diaper, and that's no longer, stereotype breaking, because that's pretty common now. But if there's things that man is, cooking dinner, doing grocery shopping, or some of those, maybe in traditional female roles, like a nurse, then, we give points for that, for a company that puts men in that kind of, situation. So, because I think culture, we're trying to get culture to see men being more involved in the home. And if you see that through imagery, whether it's ads from companies, and some have done a great job, like P&G is probably the best one, who, a company that's breaking those stereotypes of seeing men, doing home, whether it's homeschooling or some of these things that, they're used to moms doing. I think that's part of the culture and mindset change that you need in this country, to say, oh, men are parents, the men, and they can have equal, time with their kids and do all that kind of things, but it takes some of that advertising.
Is some of your data and some of your advocacy aimed at changes in legislation on a federal or state level? In other words, okay, this is this company's policy. Here's what's working for this company in their advertising, in how they reach out, their family policy, their family leave. Do you do any advocacy for gender fair in terms of, hey, we're not going to wait for every corporation in America to see the light? Here's what we think ought to be passed as laws on a federal level, say about returnship and coming back to a job and having the legal right to re-enter, or the legal right to paid maternity leave for a couple of years, say, for preschool children. as they do, for instance, where my daughter was living in Finland, where the state actually paid her and her husband to trade off and stay home and do childcare. They gave them a stipend to do that for the first few years. And that was just seen as a no-brainer. It cost the state less than doing quote unquote professional childcare and so on. Do you have any advocacy for actual legislation based on what you're finding in terms of what companies won't do? Okay, let's make a law.
So no, the easy answer is no, we don't do advocacy. If you look at other countries, whether it's like France, who had a quota and said 40% of the board members have to be women, and that's done over 4 years, and it was done for publicly traded companies, and now they're saying 40% of the C-suite have to be women, and that they're underway in getting that done. We have, there's quotas in California on the board, but I really think that I don't have time for the government to go through that whole process. Right. I think it's the workplace and the businesses that are going to have to change, because one, the young people demand it, right? And if some companies, like leaders, like think about a General Motors or Microsoft or P&G, Walmart's done a lot in terms of diversity, by the way. If those are leaders, then you're going to eventually lose out on potential employees. Consumers care about this, we know. Yeah. Investor community is pressuring companies to do better. BlackRock is pressuring. So I really think it's the business to peer pressure, as well as from their stakeholders.
And the consumer pressure too.
Consumers, employees, it's coming from all sides. So I think that is a better approach, than
well, and according to your own studies, in terms of the general public, including men, they're much more interested in several tight items before how many people are sitting in the boardroom, what's the gender balance in the boardroom, pay, lack of sexual harassment, fairness, advancement comes on the list higher than the token board member. How many, so all this stuff in France and Sweden and other places that have tried to legislate that actually hasn't worked very well, because there's a lot of women who care, that's not their dream job, as being on a board, but they would still like to be treated fairly and decently where they do go to work. And I think that's you made that point in just terms of your studies.
Well, it's really Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like all the having senior executives, it's nice, but if the basics aren't met, it doesn't matter, right?
Well, and the tokenism at the top means nothing.
Right.
Do you get, I'm going to sign off here in a minute. This is Frank Schaeffer, and I'm talking with Jose Zeilstra. Say the name right.
Jose Zeilstra.
Zeilstra. Yeah. Jose Zeilstra. So there's too many Z's in there for me. But anyway, before we go, if you like this, please like it and spread the word, and note that you can listen again if you missed this live or part of it. We will be on our podcast venues and on YouTube and back on Facebook. But a question before we go, are you, does Gender Fair ever name companies as particularly egregious and bad, or name companies that are doing a good job? I mean, you did drop one name a minute ago. Do you do that regularly with people or the media if they just ask you for information for good examples or bad ones?
We want to incentivize companies. We don't want to name shame companies. So we do recognize, as part of what Gender Fair does, is to promote companies that are doing well. So we will promote them from every tower, and take them to, we went to TED, Women in the World. We really, really want to promote companies that do well in this area. And then, hopefully those that don't are incentivized to do better.
Can you name a couple that are doing well that you would name?
Well, like I said, I think, General Motors and Microsoft and P&G and, a lot of the commercial banks, like Citi and Bank of America and JP Morgan, they're all, do well. Gap for fashion, and fashion industry is typically not Gender Fair. So that, is one that wouldn't, but there's, Mars, I can give you, if you give me an
That's great. That's great. So say once again how people who want to get the app, where they go, and just make that one more time. Let's tell them how to get involved with this.
It's Gender Fair on the App Store, both for Android and iOS. So it's easy to download and just play with it, invite your friends. And the more, it's all about collective consumers, right? The more people who start using it, the more people who switch brands, the more that companies take notice. And
you have a real impact.
And we have real impact. So thank you.
Well, listen, thank you for your time, and we will talk again. I'm really, really interested in this. I think it's a terrific thing you're doing. Let me know if there's things you want us to tell the people who watch what we do as you progress and change and grow. Come back and talk some more about this whole issue. And if you've watched this, please do share this with other people. This is really good information. We can get something done with this app. So thank you very much. This is Frank Schaeffer. See you later. Take care. Thank you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.